Okay. I want to start by asking you the role that you feel film and video have played in art from your perspective, the perspective of the work that you have done in your career, the time you spent at university, and I guess also the time you spent teaching. So that's a very broad starting point. I mean, fire away and then I may or may not interrupt you depending where we go.
Well, from my point of view, they were always quite separate things, film and video, particularly starting at, starting from the art point of view, art school and so on. When I went to art school, I was sort of taken in with very few students in both the BA and the MA into interdimensional studies, which was an area so-called between sculpture and painting. So it was sort of basically mixed with, it was the vision of somebody called Bob Hyde, who unfortunately died, and he started environmental media at the Royal College, where I also went. And it was sort of partly technologically driven, but it was a kind of interdisciplinary idea where performance, theatre, everything could be drawn into this area, and most people had actually come from other disciplines. Wimbledon, where I went, where he had this interdisciplinary area, the other people were kind of older, so there were music people as well. So film wasn't really a thing, because film was doing its own thing and had been doing it for a long time.
Right.
And art films were more to do with, or art on film were more to do with the texture of film, people swinging cameras around, no narrative basically. Very, very uncommercial, only kind of really appreciated by other artists who understood what was going on. There was no video that was available for outside of broadcast then, which was about 1969, early 70s, until video porta packs came along, which were really bad quality, black and white, and you couldn't edit them. You couldn't edit it. You could put powder on it, and there was a sort of, it would reveal a diagonal line which you could cut, but of course, as soon as the tape heads went over this, there was a big sort of jump. So the early video art sort of developed around, single shots, and a lot of what I can remember, and I wasn't terribly interested in it in those days, or I did have a go, but it was too frustrating, because you couldn't edit anything. The ones I can remember were they were like performance art pieces on video, but they had sort of related to the medium. So there was one person who was David Hall, who everyone was very highly respected, but he was sort of before all this, and the only thing I know he made, because he wasn't somebody I ever met, but other people referred to him, was a fire on a television set that goes on for ages, and that.
I think I bought a VHS or something like that at some point.
And various, and then there were people I was at college with at the Royal College, because it was starting to get more available, but it was still sort of grainy, black and white, largely people who weren't performers themselves, but they were kind of performance artists, doing pieces for the video rather than a recording of a happening or anything like that. So the people like Clive Richardson and Steve Partridge and so on, who went on. I think Steve Partridge carried on doing video art at Dundee. Clive Richardson went on to do Susie and the Banshees videos and things like that.
Oh wow! Another Bromley.
Sorry?
Another Bromley person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So latterly, the way I got into it, particularly, I was never really interested in film. I saw it, I saw video as being more modern. Started doing what were they called? They were sort of like multi-slide shows, basically, where you'd have
AV shows,
great banks of
projectors, and
it was hell programming it because it was beeps, and if the beeps got out of sync, everything else got out of sync as well because it didn't know where it was. And a number of people were doing those with music and programming these big, multi-screen things. And I started, I started doing that, and I did a few pieces with Andrew Logan, the person who does the Alternative Miss World, and so they began to get structured, and they were from his photographs, or a photographer called Robin Beach. Anyway, they were starting to be more structured, and video was still just too impossible. And then at the start, it was the guy who went on to do Susie and the Banshees videos because he had money and he'd built sets for Yes and things. He bought a big low band U-matic machine.
Right, yes. I remember those.
And I remember being impressed that he was picking out all the bits from programs and editing out the presenters and putting all these things together with crash edits, because the editing was hopeless. It was kind of much too expensive. And in a way that eventually became the idea for Ultramage, that you just have the good bits and you wouldn't have the presenters. That was the ideal. Of course, that meant you had to make all the good bits, but to do without the presenters. So I think I was going around trying to sell the idea of a video, because there were very early pop promos being made, but nobody much saw them because MTV hadn't started. But I knew people were making them at art school. There were art school bands, and they were making very, very early pop promos. I was trotting around trying to sell the idea of a VHS video magazine made up of these videos that no one could see. One of the people I went to see was Charlie Gillett, who's a DJ. I don't know if you heard of him, probably if you've been out to the country. He was very well known, very accessible person, lived in Clapham, and he'd found Dire Straits and all sorts of people. So I trotted along to him and sort of said, I have this idea for a video magazine of, we can make videos for people and we can show all the videos that are being made that nobody's seeing. And nothing much happened except that Channel 4 started. And we made a few videos actually in us. By that time we had an artist studio in Brixton that, so we had a video studio, which was, eyed with great suspicion by other artists at the time. We'd made Stiff Little Fingers video and a few other things. By that time I think we had a low band edit suite. On tape, and you had to edit in the 8-fill sequence.
Yeah, no, yes, the shows of PAL.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we formed this little company. I'm skipping a thing. So we Channel 4 was going around because they'd heard that people were making all kinds of interesting things in their bedrooms that nobody knew anything about, and they were worried that everything was being left behind. And he went. This commissioning editor went around and he met Charlie Gillett and he said, "Oh, you should go and see these people in Brixton working out of a meat pie factory, and they're doing art and music, and we did various dance videos as well. So things that
I think I remember seeing some dance.
Yeah,
Was
well,
the dance
this is what
Ultramage
Ultramage became,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Charlie Gillett told Mike Bolland, and who was the commissioning editor, and we got on with him really well, and he said write it up as a magazine program, so we wrote it up. Just, was my idea for the video magazine, and it was commissioned, just like that. But then we spent 2 years fighting the unions to be allowed to make it.
Oh yeah. Was that because of technical standards or the
We
crews?
weren't in the-
You weren't in the right. Yeah.
Also, they didn't like that we had so few people. They didn't like that we were not using 1-inch machines.
Mm-hmm.
And we never even looked at film. So I remember one dreadful meeting. The commissioning editor and Jeremy Isaacs, my partner Mark, he did this amazing thing with Mike Bolland, where to convince the rest of Channel 4 that we could make this, we what's the word? Crashed a big Channel 4 meeting when it was in. There was no great Channel 4 building. It was in some building in Knightsbridge somewhere. And there was a big meeting of all the execs, and we got, was it Carlton or somebody, who were a big OB company, to provide the equipment to run into this, and we showed them the Fringe Theatre and dance videos and music videos we made, and there were, there's some of the people at Channel 4 really cross that we were, who are these people, sort of, but they'd never seen anything like it before. And Jeremy Isaacs loved that sort of thing, of people crashing meetings, and he said, commission these people. And then all the business with the unions started, because we were commissioned but were not allowed to make it because we weren't in the union, and we were proposing to do it with lightweight video equipment, which my students wouldn't pick up nowadays, but it was considered light then. And yes, the crew weren't necessarily, in the union either. And I remember this meeting with the chief engineer at Channel 4 at the time, and we had to show him some work to show it was technically okay. And we were lying, it was actually low band, and we said it was high band. And it was of Dougie Fields, and won an award in Canada. And it was Dougie Fields was a very ostentatiously gay painter.
Mm-hmm.
And he was presenting his work, and this chief engineer said, well, I suppose it's technically okay, but my mother wouldn't watch it. But it was enough to get through. It wasn't me asked to judge the thing. So eventually we all got in the union, and Channel 4 gave us this big 1-inch machine, portable 1-inch machine, which nearly killed the sound recordist.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, yes.
And had some terrible technical fault, and Channel 4 had to pay for it all to be recovered, and and then there was lots of people coming up behind us as well, worse than we were in the union's eyes, and so it was all. They sort of left us alone, but.
So with the early work.
Oh, I think that's a delivery. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Ideal, sometimes realised, to not make documentaries with presenters talking to artists about their work, but to actually make work, collaborate with the artists and performers to make original pieces for television, which would be video art, or at least, so, and not just to document something that was going on. So that was the ideal.
So going back earlier than that, when you were talking about the first time you really came across video, and I think it was the Sony thing, wasn't it? The Tetra Pak or whatever it was called.
But, yes, U-matic.
Yes, the one that you couldn't edit. And
right, that was the Portapak.
Portapak, yeah. To what extent did that make the work be as much about the technical thing of how you used it as opposed to anything you might want to a story you might want to tell, just because it was so clumsy and hard to.
It was quite conceptual what people did. I mean, it was working within the limits of a frame, you know, because I don't think anyone was a great camera person or anything. You weren't running around with them. Things were sitting on a tripod and people did things in front of it within the limits of the frame. I can't really remember the work. There was one of the students, I know he had a thing of him masturbating in front of the camera. I still wasn't very interested in it at that point because it seemed very limited to me.
Yeah.
And I was building these big sound environments and things at the Royal College, and I had this one go at doing a motorbike thing, and I needed editing, and the BBC sent a technician down for a whole day to try and stabilise these edits because they just rolled every time it went. Just imagine, and it was impossible. It wasn't. They couldn't fix it. It just went away again. So, but the BBC paid for this person to come down. And
wow, that's interesting. I do feel that when I started work, I started at Complete in May 1983, and I felt that then a good chunk of the time every day on a job was as much about overcoming technical issues as it was about telling a great story or whatever it was that we were trying to do.
But it was usually, there was the early days of offline online, wasn't it?
Yes.
So everyone had probably made their decisions before they came to you. Well,
most people had, but even then, just getting the list from an offline into an online.
Well, it was ticker tape. It was ticker tape.
It was ticker tape, or then we developed that system where you could read the vertical info time code on pneumatics and produce a list from that.
Yes.
But that, of course, if it had been down generations, it was hard to read and
then you had to do. I remember the first time I came to Complete.
Yeah.
The editor sort of decided to just do it. I can't remember, but I knew it had to be edited in the way I'd edit it because it had to cover over things. And he tried to go straight away for the finished thing, which didn't work because the way it had been in the ticker tape didn't understand that like it does, things do now. But I remember almost being in tears because we were spending longer at that huge price.
Oh my God, it was, wasn't it? It really
trying to recreate what I'd done, taking longer to recreate it than it had taken me to do it in the first place. And that's when we decided we had to get our own because it was just a phenomenal price.
It was hugely expensive, wasn't it? And again, like I say, I think an awful lot of time was spent every day just resolving technical issues, which wasn't because of Complete, it was just that's the way stuff worked then.
Well, Complete was a kind of first, wasn't it, in terms of being not inside a broadcast setup. And not one of the pure commercials, not moving pics or rushes. Well, video is supposed to film.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't have a telecine to start with, probably not until 85.
I did go back to do things like sound mixes and things later on, but no, we got our own editing, vast expense. And that was another thing, we weren't even allowed to buy our first 1-inch machines by Sony.
Why? So what was that about? Why was that?
Well, I think it was a technical thing. They knew they had to be tweaked quite a lot.
Every day?
So that if you weren't, an engineer or engineer-approved place, that you could show their equipment in a bad light. So these machines we needed 3 1-inch machines, I think, and they were 60 grand a go in those days.
Oh, at least, yeah.
And they wouldn't sell them to us. And in the end, there was some engineer there who became a great friend in the end and worked for us, who vouched that we were okay and we could do that. I mean, not that I did more than get the phase right, but that we could manage this, and they accepted our money reluctantly. just amazing, isn't it, looking back and thought of all that. There were so many struggles to, when you say overcoming those technical things, and that was the same. And then it got down from the 8-field sequence to the 4-field sequence. And then it was two. And then when you did pickups to go into a dissolve, the thing would jump.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, that's what I mean by I feel that the technical side of things drove a fair amount of what was going on. I mean, to the point, like you say, of where you could place an edit.
Yes.
You might, an 8-field, that's 4 frames. You had to do it on that one, although you might have wanted to cut 3 frames earlier. Yeah. You couldn't, could you? It was you were stuck with that.
Yeah.
And it definitely affected how things looked.
Yeah.
So where did things go after Ultra Image?
Well, that went on most of the 80s, because we did 3 series. So it's about 160 5 short films inside each program, and there were 10 in a series, so it was kind of a lot. I think in between the 2nd and the 3rd series we began to do other things. Quite conventional in a way, but we were always kind of driven more by the image than necessarily a narrative. Mm-hmm. So we did some operas and dance pieces, a series of musicals with Pookie Snackerberger, then who became Stomp.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, so Pookie Snackerberger became Stomp.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know. I hadn't made that. I didn't realise that. And
it came out of one of the things we had in the musicals, which was what we call dustbin dance. They'd always, when they were buskers, they used to, busk with dustbins hung around their necks, which they'd actually been inspired. There were 2 main people who went on, Steve McNicholas and Luke Cresswell, and they were the brains behind it, really. And they were inspired to do that by the drummers of Burundi. Mm-hmm. And so we put them together with a choreographer for this section in this musical. And so it was a sort of mixture of Kubrick, Clockwork Orange, Hollywood tap dancing, drumming, and the choreography, sort of rumble type fake fighting sort of thing, where they're kind of going towards each other drumming. Now, that was quite successful. It was ripped off by Heineken. Mm-hmm. They did their almost very similar version, but they wouldn't let any of the women be in it. And then I think Luke and Steve tried to be conventional pop musicians, and that didn't work out, so they went back to this drumming on objects and dustbin lids, and that was Stomp.
Well, that worked.
Yes. Yeah. I used to show students how ideas develop, because that's something now they're not being taught. They're getting quite young people in to teach, like who've been making self-shooting documentaries, say.
Right.
And I've got 2 particular cases of this recently. In one way you think, oh great, they're really practical people, they can do everything as you have to nowadays, and I did latterly. But they came from engineering degrees and things, and they're not teaching students, and my colleague who's still there confirms this, they're not teaching them how you can formulate an idea and grab a concept here and put it together with that, and that might become something. That's just not being taught.
Well, okay.
Which art schools are particularly good at, really.
Yeah, well, that's what they're there for, isn't
it? Yes.
So, going back to early Ultra Image Channel 4 days, were there other outlets alongside you that were doing similar-ish kind of work? Were there other opportunities for people to make that kind of work? Where did it go? Or did Channel 4 go, no, actually that's too left field for us, we want, and bring it in and be a little more towards the centre? I mean, where would I go to see it now? If I wanted to see something like that
Online.
made today?
It would be online.
So there's no major broadcaster or...
No, you couldn't make anything like that now. Even John Wyver, I don't know if you know him.
I know the name.
Illuminations. He did a lot of arts programs as a producer. He wasn't really a maker. I know him quite well. We all went on a Channel 4 arts shindig to New York once, and he was putting together some arts program and galleries and things. And I remember, we were all doing our thing on stage, and John Wyver showed this bit of this art series, which is now thought of as very well. But Jeremy Isaacs said to him he was really disappointed it was so conventional. And so Channel 4 was looking for people to do something different. But now, John Wyver said to me, and John Wyver's gone into doing adaptations of Shakespeare, that's his big thing, as a producer.
Yep.
And he says, I've given up, so-and-so told me there's no way he'd get any commissions anymore. I mean, and that's quite a conventional end of things. And he kept going for quite a long time. There was a moment when we were both pitching for something outside of Channel 4, which was Jeremy Isaacs went on to do one of the early cable channels, Arts World, and we were both pitching for something. And they said, well, our pitch was much better, but he was prepared to do it for £5,000 an hour, which is just people sitting on the sofa.
Yeah.
And I think he hired our studio in the end, or somebody else did.
I'm not even sure about a sofa there. You might be a bench.
Maybe it was £10,000 an hour. It was still,
yeah,
just rubbish. All you can do is have people talking to each other. And so we backed off it at that point, and I went and got another job. And people were hiring our studio because producer choice was still going on. Because we had by that time we got quite a big studio in Brixton, and a lot of people used to hire it. And then producer choice stopped at the BBC. They weren't allowed to hire outside studios, and they were more or less in competition with us. And so I went and got another job.
I remember when producer choice came in,
yes,
and everybody was very excited about it, but we were constantly underbid by the BBC.
Yes.
So
yes.
it was sort of choice, but not really.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, it's slightly off what you want to know about.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I was just there are various stories around that, but I was.
Well, no, because I don't have Sky, but on Freeview there's Sky Arts.
Yeah.
And when I look at Sky Arts, which I don't do very often, but when I do, it's not going anywhere particularly.
No, I don't think they're commissioning.
No, I mean, you more likely you're going to get an old Pink Floyd concert or
exactly.
Or
so I sometimes watch it because it's better than anything else that's on.
Right, but it's not that often you're going to get anything actually about art.
No. And so we did masses of collaborations with other artists and dancers, and I got commissions to do sound on films, which were working with a composer to make a piece for television, and choreographers to make a dance piece for television. So there were these smallish slots, but you had to do. They were only 15 minutes long, and you had to do a pilot for this 15 minutes and be interviewed by a panel. And because, Channel 4 was no longer doing all this commissioning, it was very highly competitive because, top directors were getting together with top choreographers to pitch for these small slots. So I did some of those, which were almost ultra-imagey, but, there was sort of intervention by the Arts Council and, all that kind of stuff. We did one with Bruce Lacey and that very famous musician. Anyway, it had models and gymnasts and things in it, so you know it was. They were sort of ultra imagey type things, but one-offs, and one in a lift I did as well. Got fed up with following dancers prancing around, and I felt it suggested, you know, it all had to happen in the confines of a lift. That was reasonably successful.
I think, thinking back to say 1978, 79, and on a Friday evening on BBC4 they rerun Old Top of the Pops. And if I'm myself or feeling a bit lazy, I'll frequently watch those, much to Joanna's kind of semi-disgust. She's like, come on, you've got to move on. You can't keep going back and watch them. But I find them fascinating to see. And of course, most of them are in the studio. But when they do show music videos, I find it interesting looking back to see that probably 50% of the clips that are not in the studio, that are promos, are as much driven by what you could suddenly do as any particular store. So you get, you know, loads of horrible video effects and things just being put out of phase, or you know, DVE every third frame being shown. But I mean, stuff that it's like someone's been let go on a GBG 300 or something and just been thrilled about that rather than any real substance.
Yeah, actually, that just reminds me. Somebody, I might have mentioned this on the phone. Somebody got in touch with me recently because we made a piece in the first series of Ultramage about the dancing legs. The artist called Jim Whiting.
Okay.
This isn't ringing any bells.
Not yet.
So
not
I'm not repeating myself.
No. Any of you were. I wasn't.
And instead of just filming his sculptures, these were automatons, you know, automatons. I suggested we did it like these had their life in this house, which was a sort of like a squat, and it was a day in the life of all these automatons, and that was seen by Godley and Cream. We just ripped it off wholesale, and it was Rocket for Herbie Hancock. Yeah. I mean, it was just remade, basically, but with a television screen in the middle with Herbie Hancock on it. And anyway, somebody phoned me up recently about writing a book about this, how these ideas started, and that just by chance that got seen and got turned into this world-famous... But, you know, and advertisers used to... in the early days, used to ask for copies of the programmes, and we thought, oh yes, you send them off, you know. I know, we might make some money. And you just see lots of things were ripped off for adverts.
Yeah.
But going back to your general theme about, I think one of the areas that video went into that film didn't was installations.
Yes.
And so currently things I've seen that people have done on video that I've been impressed by have been installations, basically. So two people like Isaac Julian, his installations are really good.
Okay.
And John Okomfra, who's our artist at Biennale at the moment. Both one's he's, I think, Ghanaian. I don't like John Okomfra's work quite so much, but he's very famous and he does installations. And of course, within an art gallery context, things can be very long because you're passing through. In fact, Isaac Julian had a one-man show at the retrospective at the Tate Britain recently. And I've always seen his installations before just passing through. You know, you go from one sculpture to another and then you reach his installation and, you know, you're in the mode of moving on, so don't sit down and watch them. But because he had his own, you know, space that was specially built for them, I watched some of them until they repeated, and they're quite amazing in a way, you know, because you've got several screens and they're, you know, throughout I don't think the sound works quite so well if they're speaking, obviously, because it's too echoey, but where the sound is... and also, I'm jumping around now, but Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen, yes, of course.
Single shot, that last one of Grenfell Towers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a piece of video art, if ever there was one. Have you seen it?
Yes.
So just high quality now, but probably things that, you know, people wouldn't do on film. I'm sure they're all video.
I'm sure just the cost of doing something on film now,
Yeah.
and it's just, I would imagine it's prohibitive to most.
So I think that's what it moved into. I went to Women in Revolt.
I did. What did you think of the show?
Well, I mean, I'm a bit ambivalent. I mean, I was obviously a woman working in that time, and I knew a lot of those people and worked with a lot of them afterwards. Like Anne Bean, who was there, but she always worked with men, in Beau Gamelan.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't work with, but know about, because I worked with Genesis and Sleazy, Cozy Fanny Tutti.
Yes.
So they were there as though they never worked with men, but there were just so many.
Robin Russell was.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
We worked with them and knew them a bit, you know, so because we sort of always tried to get our heads around other people's work. You know, that was one of the great things about doing things like Alter Image. You know,
I just found it a bit messy. The Women in
Exactly.
Revolt. I thought there was either not enough space for all the stuff they had there, or too much stuff for the space they had, and it was. It didn't feel like it had been done with the love that, for instance, the Yoko Ono show at Tate Modern, which has a load of space, and it's just a joy to wander around. Well, it goes on till September.
Oh, right, okay.
And I went because I felt really ignorant about Yoko Ono. I felt that I knew little more than you know, she'd broken up the Beatles, which we know not to be true. But do you know what I mean? She was an add-on to the Beatles as opposed to, and I knew that she wasn't just that, but I didn't know very much about her, so I went to see it. And I felt that was really, really beautifully done, and a lot of space. And Women in Revolt, it brought back tons of memories, and you know, the graffiti billboards and stuff that you're like, oh yes, I'd forgotten about all of that. And all the fanzines and stuff, but it felt like somebody had emptied their loft into there, and it
also confirmed some of my ideas about the kind of work women were doing. I used to always jokingly say, although somebody did actually do this, you know, an exhibition of used tampons and you know, sewing and cooking stuff, you know, cakes made into something, and I never really, you know, I just thought that, you know, I just didn't want to do that, and it was very highly political, wasn't it, the whole thing?
Yes.
And that was very unfashionable when they did it. It wasn't considered art, really, to be political. But now it's, you know, it's almost not okay unless you are political.
Right, if you're not, then it's just decoration, isn't it? Now it's not, yeah.
So that was odd, but I mean, especially now I need glasses to, you know, see further and close up. It's quite a difficult exhibition to watch because you had to keep putting your glasses on to read this.
Well, there was an awful lot of printed stuff,
yes,
wasn't there, in cases that weren't well lit either. I kept on like reflections and all. I don't know. I'm glad they did it, but it didn't feel like they did it with.
It didn't. I mean, Spare Rib. It was somebody I know was in some of those photos, and Spare Rib wasn't an art magazine, was it? It was,
no.
So they lumped it all together. I mean, maybe it was my misconception that it was to do with art, but I mean, there were still things made out of cakes, but there weren't any tampons around.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's another kind of odd thing, isn't it? The political, how everything's got to have some kind of political thing or be about gender now.
Yeah, and I went to see William Kentbridge's show, which I thought was also absolutely beautiful, really, really beautiful. And tons of stuff there that was interesting and fascinating. But also he's white. And in such a political time as now, like, wow, what are young people making of this? Is this appropriate or not appropriate? I frequently feel out of my depth, put it that way, with some of the things now.
Stuff is quite inventive, isn't it?
Yes, and it's gorgeous.
You can appreciate it on lots of different levels.
But there's also a lot of political stuff about black people in South Africa. And you know, certainly in American universities, I would wonder that people wouldn't be like, well, William Kentbridge has no basis on which to be making this work and what have you. Which I'm not saying I don't agree with at all, but you just, you know, I went. Have you been round the National Portrait Gallery since it redid itself?
No.
That's an interesting experience now. You go and all of the cards are not about who the artist was, what they were doing, why they were doing that. Then they're about how we interpret it now, which is a strange way of looking at art, because when they made it, they had no clue what way we were going to go or how things were going to work out. And so I feel that we're giving those pieces of art a piece of some context that they didn't have. That's not the context they had when they were made, which surely is what you want to know, right or wrong, so that you can learn about how were people thinking then, why were they thinking that, you know, however uncomfortable or...
It's also quite anti-creative now that you have to be so careful to say the right thing or not to be thought to be appropriating something.
Yeah.
It's just sort of like, everything's so sort of touchy and dangerous to...
Yeah, very much so. Very much so, yes. And goodness, it'd be interesting to look back at the old alter image stuff and see, you know, if there's stuff there that... How would it be? Can you see the alter image stuff somewhere?
There's quite a lot online, yes. People have put up there. I mean, I've got it all. People ask me for clips for things from time to time. I must say the quality doesn't look very good, but then it's been converted so many times from one format to another. But
you think that's a perpetual worry of people, and I never think that's a valid worry. That I think if the idea is good, and what you're saying is interesting,
it doesn't look too bad if you actually look at it on television, you know. But if you look at it on a computer, you know, by current day standards. But we did put a lot of effort into making production values as high as they could be, you know, given the budget and the time and all the rest. I remember we were quite keen on that. There's quite a bit there, and I think we did a lot of gay stuff as well at the time, and that seems to have brought, you know. And then I latterly got into music from other countries rather than. And we applied the same kind of thing, tried to make something rather than just record it. But sometimes all we did was record what people were doing in the studio because we couldn't think of anything else, and we only had an afternoon. But one of the very first things, one of the most enduring pieces actually, was the very first thing on the very first programme that was on Alter Image, which we had 2 hours with this Japanese group called Senkai Juku. That's online. And I looked at the pictures of where they liked to be filmed.
It's okay, we're good.
I looked at the pictures of where they liked to be filmed, and they'd sort of got photographs themselves in Stonehenge and things. And this is, I don't know if you know Buto dance, but it moves very, 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 very slowly, sort of fantastic imagery, but if you sit in the theatre, it will take half an hour for somebody to cross the stage, and that's all we were looking at. So we just took them to the bowels of Battersea Power Station, which was all rotting away with the furnaces, and they'd yabber away in Japanese, about some bit that inspired them, and then we'd set up the camera in some way that represented, what they were going to do, which they were they were improvising on the spot, and that endures to, now as, yeah. So we always, again, I said this to somebody recently, it might have been you, 50% of what we shot in the first series we threw away. Because
you did mention that, yeah.
And I think we sort of got more conventional by the time we got to the third series and more economic, but we had our own formula by then.
And was that a good thing?
No, it wasn't a good thing.
No, it sounds... Do you still have the 50% that you threw away?
No.
So you literally threw away?
It was on high band. We kept it all for years, and then we moved the studio. BFI took all the edited stuff, but they didn't take all the... And then BFI have got everything. In fact, they've selected about 80 programmes for video on demand for educational, free view for educational purposes. Bizarre choices, I have to say, not what I'd expect, but they probably went by who was in the programme or something. It's not all Ultra Images, so, it's various other programmes. We did classical music series for BBC Two as well, and jazz package, which was just a packaging job, and also had another job sort of with putting all the BFI and Arts Council funded films, which were all dramatically different lengths, trying to find a way of packaging that so that they could be programmes of roughly equal length. So did things like that too.
Yeah, I find that really interesting, the idea of things being lost. Thing that that, as you say, you threw out 50%, and that's gone now. And I wonder what will happen when, before I came here yesterday, I thought I better just check how much memory I've got on my phone, and I had plenty, but nonetheless it also said that I had something like 30,000 photographs on my phone, and X number of songs and what have you. But the photos in particular, because those are pictures I've taken.
Yeah.
What will happen to those eventually? I mean, whoever... I'm not going to wade through 30-odd thousand pictures.
I do panic every now and then that everything's been lost, and then, manage to recover it again. But I do look at my my goddaughter and her friends, who are they're in their started early 30s now, but they're all musicians and mixed race, and they film everything, and there's so many photographs, and they're always smiling and on a beach, or they're all...
Well, it's very performative, isn't it?
Yes,
ironically.
but there's so much of it. Rather than this being a precious thing that you found, the one photograph of that time, which even in the 70s, I've got hardly any photographs of the 70s.
Oh, same. And yeah, I remember over 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, going on holiday and buying my children an action camera, like a GoPro kind of thing, but in a waterproof case. And my Middleton Bronwyn, my little daughter, took control of it. Straight away decided she was going to be in charge of it. And we were away for a week, and when we got back, I downloaded all the pictures, and she had taken over 3,000 basically selfies, one way or another. And it was a bit shocking, but it was also a revelation in a way. What happens to all of that?
I don't know. I mean, it is mind-boggling, isn't it? Because it doesn't have the same value in a way, does it? And it's all very self-edited in terms of they're only going to be smiling, and they're and in some gorgeous place, which...
I took a picture of someone on a train recently just because they looked interesting. and showed it to some people on my course, and a couple of the younger people were like, well, did you ask them if you could take the picture? And I'm like, no, of course I didn't. That wouldn't have been interesting if I'd asked them. But they were actually appalled that I'd done that I'd.
Yeah, I don't know. I have some sympathy for that, because when I go to Africa, I think I'm not ruthless enough, because I know some people there still think their soul is taken by, the photograph takes some of their soul away. Usually only people in rural areas, but I know if I was a proper documentary person, I would just breeze through all that. It's funny because people often ask in the street to take my photograph, and I always say why. And I was at the V&A the other day, and this young French guy came up and said, "Oh, come here, can I take my photograph with my friends?" And I said, "Why?" I'm thinking they're going to ridicule me or something. This old lady with and he was quite affronted, and I said, "Well, what do you want it for?" Being terribly suspicious. And he said, "Oh, I just want to show the French people what an English person looks like." I said, "Oh, all right then," and it wasn't very convincing. And then all his friends piled in behind. But normally it's for some design project a student's doing or something like that. I usually think old people can look all right too, dressed up. But I don't know. When I'm out filming, I do feel sensitive to people who might not want to be filmed.
But isn't that partly that what you're filming might end up in the public, in a very public domain,
exactly.
On television or whatever, and so, we have clearance documents for that, don't you, and what have you, but just taking a candid photograph,
Well, you don't know where it ends up. One of the things I did in Nigeria, it was in some women's thing. It was the first health thing I did. Not that I did many, I think only 2, but this was the first one. And I was only there because there were 2 female Nigerian doctors who'd asked me to go, and I edited it together. And then people knew they were being filmed, but when I showed them the cut, they said, "Oh, you have to take out this picture of this woman, because although she's got the headdress on, she hasn't got a veil over the top of it, and people all over the world now can see things on YouTube, and her husband will divorce her if he sees this picture of her without her full kit on." And it's quite possible now that something can be uploaded to YouTube, and people have family all over the world.
So, but then for you to be doing a genuine documentary,
I wasn't getting release forms from anybody, but
well, then in an ideal world, or is this going too far? In an ideal world, before you start shooting, you'd have to know what all the mores are and what you can and can't do, and then keep to that and shoot the way you were. But otherwise, you've lost a certain amount of editorial control, haven't you?
Yes, well, I don't on the whole do things like that, but yes, I'm always a bit circumspect, particularly if you don't fully understand the mores of the...
Yeah.
She just don't... Everything can end up anywhere now. I'm
Very much so.
So I'm not so wildly keen on being photographed by people I don't know. Unless I know it's happening. But I did one of the last things I did, which is currently in film festivals, was to do with the sculpture in Crystal Palace Park. And there's a sort of section of different people interacting with it. And I do worry sometimes that someone was going to pipe up and say, "I didn't give you permission to." So I was shooting it over a kind of period of time, and I didn't even know I was going to make a film out of it all at one time. So when I started,
I mean, you couldn't shoot. You couldn't do decisive moment, could you? If you're going to approach work that way. No. That's sort of done.
Anyway, it was occasionally. I sort of worry about the fact that I didn't ask permission from. There was particularly one person I film, not thinking I was going to use it. Who's vaguely in my circuit, who might want to know.
But your comment about that things can end up anywhere.
Yes.
That's really true, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, if you think when you were doing Alter Image, the thing that program could end up all over the world and people all over you'd be delighted.
Yes.
You'd be
But
absolutely.
everyone signed release forms for that. It was a proper thing.
But things didn't travel then that way, did they? They didn't get about as much.
No, not as much. But it
No.
did go to Australia and America and those sort of places. Bought it. And curiously, Bette Midler, who was married to someone called Harry Kipper, one of the Kipper brothers, who was a performance art group once upon a time in England. Her husband, Harry Kipper, or whatever his name was, was a great fan of the programme, and they were asking for permission to make their own version, and that never seemed to go anywhere, but in the end they made a one-off from parts of it. And one of Stomp said that they'd gone to their office and all the Alter Images were lined up on the shelves.
Wow. Oh, well, that's great, isn't it? I mean,
not that it resulted in anything for us, but yes, it's financially, I mean, but it is amazing. Yeah.
Well, things suddenly got so much easier to see, didn't they, at the end of the 90s? I remember I was living in Seattle at the time, and if we made a commercial for somebody and there was work in progress to show, and they weren't in Seattle, they were in Los Angeles or New York or wherever they were, you had to finish by a certain time so that you could make a low band and put it on a FedEx or put it on a flight to get there. And it's very constraining, and the only people who are going to see it were whoever was near the low band tape. Whereas all of a sudden, 99, 2000, we started posting things on an FTP site, albeit small, and suddenly way more people could see it, and which meant you got way more feedback on changes and what have you, which has brought its own misery. But it was a very.
But the other thing to do with art and Channel 4, everything has now become very, very compartmentalised, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get much crossover, so Channel 4 wouldn't commission anything like that now, and film festivals prefer narrative dramas or single character documentaries. So even the things I make now, which are working with different. Well, I did one with a performer in Nigeria and England who was a friend of Nina Simone's and had all these recordings she left on her phone at night. And Nina Simone left on her phone at night. And we made a sort of piece out of that, and that did very well all over Africa. Even though sometimes people didn't know Nina Simone was incredibly, but people still, because it didn't have a direct narrative, it didn't really fly that well in England. And the two pieces I made recently, one with an artist, which has got a sort of science type. It's got a deep. What do you call it? Forgotten the word. A woman, Japanese woman that dives holding her breath for very long periods of time.
Oh, right, yeah.
Free diver. And swims with fish, and it's all about breathing, but it doesn't fit any particular documentary genre, because you don't see the people talking. There's a professor, a singer, an artist, one of my friends comes from the worst polluted part of Nigeria. They're just their voices, and then the rest is imagery that we've created that, sometimes obviously and sometimes obscurely refers to what they're talking about. It's very difficult to place it because documentaries are quite, one thing now. And it doesn't quite fit art gallery because it's got these voiceovers, And the same with the sculpture, the one based on the sculpture of Psyche Abandoned, which has got a kind of narrative with it. It's quite entertaining, but doesn't sort of, it's not quite, it's a mixture of fact and fiction, sort of like a magic realist take on something. It's got Juliet Stevenson doing the voiceover, so even with that, it's very difficult because people say, oh, it's not really a documentary, and it's not really anything else either.
So are these constraints that came in, when were you first aware?
I think it's been going on for a while. I mean, everything sort of has to fit some particular slot or other. You just look at television. I'd never have thought of... one of the reasons I wanted to make television was that, as I think you said as well, was that, this was a medium where lots of people would see. Because I think I did one piece in an art gallery, big art festival in my first year. And I just was so unenchanted by, A, the Arts Council people, and B, the smallness of the audience. Even though it was quite a big event, and I thought, well, TV is, where everyone watches it, this is the place to go to, but now, we'd never get anything like Ultra Image Commission now, it would be impossible. It would have to have and in fact, after Ultra Image, even though it was proved to be really successful not to have a presenter, because you're telling you what to think about what you're seeing, there was a lot of antagonism from likes of people, behind Arena and so on, saying, well, what's your editorial? Where's your editorial, and how are people supposed to understand this? And we met all sorts of people subsequently, have nothing to do with the art world. So I used to love that, just being seen weird stuff.
Yeah.
And so after that, we were endlessly down the train of having to find a presenter, suggesting lots of different presenters, and they turned down just incredible people, just because they hadn't seen them before. So we suggested, for one thing, which was the circus programme, Richard O'Brien. No. This is pre-Crystal Maze.
Mm-hmm.
Julian Clary. No. It's just amazing. An endless round of suggesting people, presenters. We were just caught in this trap of... presenters forevermore, and the music series had to have presenter, like everything, and I went to a BBC programme review thing because the commissioning editor was away, and I went there, and that was like, it's like suddenly standing in cold water, because they went on about presenters all the time, making snidey jokes about them that were political digs against each other really, and you suddenly got a view of the BBC in terms of what people think was what the whole BBC village thought. It didn't really... You think, no, people don't think that, There's no outside world outside of this BBC bubble.
Yeah. Okay. So why do you think that 40 years ago, when we could very easily add up the total number of hours that were available on television in a week, you could get a slot like you did, and probably some others loosely related to you in some way, but of a very finite pool of available television hours. And yet now, when we have a vast number of television hours available, and I'm talking about television as well, stuff that comes through the aerial or through the cable box, not YouTube, not anything else, there's virtually none.
It's when people won't take risks. You've heard about it in drama for a long time. Say Friends of the North, that became very, very popular, very successful drama series. They just couldn't get that commissioned for years and years, and then the writers of dramas have been particularly saying you can't get interesting dramas commissioned anymore. But do we need it? If there'd been YouTube in those days, that was the natural home for it. That's why so many pieces people have plucked off air and put up on YouTube, except that we wouldn't have had the money to make it.
Precisely. you know, even if it goes on YouTube, you've still got to make it, and,
Yes.
and it's still got to look.
Yes, exactly. Yes. It's quite, but I think it's entirely to do with people not wanting to take any risks, maybe because of the hierarchy they're in or something, or that they can't lose money, or it's, I mean, you've got fantastic dramas on Netflix and so on. I mean, you know, real knocks film out individual films out the water, you know, doesn't it? So it's but still, film maintains its kind of snooty, superior to everything.
Yeah.
But I don't know how rambling this is with regard to what you're interested in terms of video and art. But
well, I'm going to talk to a lot of people, and then distill something out of all of that. So it's all pertinent. It'll all be even more pertinent the more of my happen, the more I can compare and contrast and think about what people have to say. Last year I did a thing where I won't be doing anywhere near this number, but last year I interviewed 28 people about. This is a real rabbit hole to go down. The opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, where they used a 45 degree shutter, which is 1/8 of the time. And my question to them was, what happened in the other 7/8 of the time that wasn't captured? I spoke to all sorts of different people about that. Artists, editors, directors, technicians. And it was a really interesting exercise to get these, and it went from being told you've got way too much time on your hands to be worrying about something like that, to people actually really sort of thinking about what might be missing there. Was there a whole other film or not? So I really like this idea of talking to lots of different people and getting their take on where they come from.
Yeah, well, a very specific question that would, I can see that when there are two ways to go, either you kind of go blur and then refine it down, or you start refining and move out, isn't it?
Right, yeah. And it was fascinating. It was really interesting to get, But I could waste a lot of my time asking people things like this. Your favourite 3 David Bowie albums or whatever, and send that out to 100 people and see what comes back. That was interesting to hear what you said about David Bowie the other day. That it hadn't been quite the person to you that he was to me.
Yeah, I can remember, when he did that New Romantics type video where he goes along the beach. Ashes to Ashes, yes. And I sort of knew some of those people that went to, what was it, Blitz or something?
Yeah.
And I've heard them speak about that afterwards, that they'd all thought David Bowie wasn't cool until he suddenly wanted to do something with them. And then they were all falling over themselves. So I wasn't the only one thinking he wasn't cool at one period of time.
Well, that was one of those videos, wasn't it, that was...
Brought him back, wasn't it?
Yes, it brought him back, but also that video is very much of its time, isn't it? The look of it is very much about what you could do in video at the time, and the effects
the pink
that were
skies
available.
And things, yes.
Right? It was very much of
and the New Romantics,
yeah. And also, I think that if you think how fast music and fashions changed in the 70s, I mean, really, how long in Britain has it been trendy to have a beard and a short back and sides, and I feel like that's been around for 15 years, that look or something. In the 70s, nothing seemed to last longer than a year and a half, and we were done. Boom, on to something else.
Yeah. 70s, I was squatting all through most of the 70s. In fact, somebody came and wrote a book about it, and we all got together, and there weren't very many photographs to share around, I have to say.
Yeah, I bet. Where did you squat?
Stockwell. And yeah.
Was it in a house or one of the big tower blocks?
No, it was a house. There were several streets that were 2 up, 2 down with outside toilets, and they were slowly moving people. Whole families lived in them. Sometimes 2 families lived in these 2 up, 2 downs, and they were slowly moving them out. And we were squatting them as fast as they moved them out, until they were going, because we knew they weren't going to pull them down for ages. So because they were small, it generated quite a sort of community, and people did them up to quite a high degree. And there was a women's group there. Have I told you this story?
No.
Oh. There was a group of women. They were women separatists, and people have been out saying that they did art, and they purposely had it like a slum because it was anti-domestic. I don't remember that, but I had a motorbike at the time, and I'd squatted this corner shop that used to be a do-it-yourself shop and had a big garage attached, but you had to go down steps into it. And some of the women used to store their motorbikes in there. It was dreadful in the morning. You had to rev up and shoot out a plank up these stairs and hope it didn't stall halfway up. Anyway, there were lots of Royal College students and students from the Architectural Association and local people all living in these squats. I've got pictures of it, and somebody's written a book, as I said, about this particular group of houses. Cameraman I worked with a lot afterwards, my brother who was a cameraman there too, film school students, everything. Where was I going with that? I must learn not to go into tangents because I've no longer got the brain to know where I was going in the first place. No, I've lost it. Oh yes, they were about to move out another load of old people, and so everybody was lined up to break into the houses before the builders came in and smashed up all the water and the loos and all the rest. My brother was there at the time, and there was a whoa at the back door, and he turned round, and one of the counsellors who was trying to stop them was at school with him.
Small world.
Yes. Anyway, we used to, one person had a bath somewhere along the street, and we used to go to that bathroom. But it was quite a creative time. But,
I would think so.
But the women's group, we didn't get enough houses to house the women separately, and so there was a great sort of disagreement afterwards because they couldn't possibly live with any men. So. And there weren't enough new houses squatted to just have the women living without men. So I can't remember how all that was resolved in the end. And they'd stolen all the signs in London that said Dyke Road.
Does squatting still happen?
It does, but it was legal in that time.
Oh, it was legal?
Yes. If you were caught breaking in, that was illegal.
Right.
Once you were in, it was legal until they wanted them back to demolish them. And in fact, we won court cases not to be moved out because they had no plans to demolish them for a while. So, but it is illegal now, so people don't do it. And anyway, no one will put up with an outside toilet anymore.
But surely, in some way, that must have helped foster artists, bands,
yes,
whatever.
Yes.
Just because one less expense. I mean, you
right.
could live that much cheaper.
Yes. Well, the first studios were a bit like that, although they were run by Acme. So there was a studio there in our first studio. Lots of people who became very famous artists, like Anthony Gormley and Richard Deacon and so on. But there was a sound studio there as well, and a band called This Heat, and the studio was called Cold Storage. And David Cunningham from Flying Lizards was there, and he recorded in this empty space, which was our joint gallery, Money, with the
yeah.
That was recorded in that.
Wow.
Which again was a set of buildings that were due for demolition, and but it took years before they demolished them, and so but Acme had officially, moved into that space. It's interesting, because talking about art and video, because Acme had 50 years of Acme. You know who Acme were. They got lots of old buildings and officially took ownership of them, and a lot of them were houses actually, and they would actually, seems outrageous now because they weren't artists themselves, would look at people's portfolios to decide whether they could have a house that they could, live, work, house. Anyway, we somehow or other, because I was at college with Richard Deacon, who found this place and thought it would be good to have somebody doing video in one of the spaces. But people were always very suspicious that video wasn't really art. And also, when I used to borrow, I think I started working at Chelsea Art School, and I was in charge of the equipment there. That's how we got started, basically. We used that equipment. But we lived there. We're not supposed to live there. We had a space behind the cupboard, like a Diary of Anne Frank. Some of the artists just thought we must be too commercial, because obviously we had to earn money to buy this kit, and then we had to guard it.
Yeah.
And people used to report us for living there, and Acme used to come round and act very suspicious and question us, and we said, no, we're not living here. We can't be doing art, it's too commercial, they've got too much money. We didn't have a lot of money, obviously, because we wouldn't be living behind a cupboard if we did. Anyway, they did an online thing about 50 years, and I joined. It was very boring talk about how successful they'd become. And then David Panton, who was one of the leading lights, saw that I was one of the people in the audience, and he said, "Oh, I'd like to speak to Jane Thorburn." So I kind of woke up and turned my Zoom thing on, and he said, "I know we had some difficult conversations," and I thought, "Oh, here it comes." And he said, "But we were all really in awe of how you did that. We used to say, how the hell did they do that? Meaning presumably get on television and buy another studio." And it was just such an amazing admission after all the so we had all that aggro from the unions saying we weren't good enough to make television. Artists were saying this can't be art. So we were fighting. It was like fighting battles on every side. I mean, not everyone down there was like that, but a number of people were.
By saying that, I think you've just kind of come full circle and answered your own question from a few minutes ago when you said, had I got what I wanted from this, and was it? Because yes, there's the story. The fact that you were doing it and you could because you had these spaces, and in fact people, I don't want to use the word jealous because that sounds. But people were in awe. They didn't understand what you were doing, but you had the freedom to do it and the opportunity to do it through a mixture of you working at that school and having access to equipment and having somewhere super cheap, free to live, and that's...
And even the tax person, because... Well, David Panton also said just what you said. We didn't understand what you were doing. But we had one of my cousins was a rather unworldly but very intelligent accountant, and he said, "Oh, you can get a loan for equipment, which we got from the bank, but the bank manager was helpful in those days, but he said, you'll have to say you're buying a car. I'll give you a loan for a car, and it's up to you what you spend it on." And we bought a camera. Anyway, I've lost my thread again. Yes. Oh no, it's gone. But anyway, even the bank was helpful. But you had to all find a way round doing absolutely everything, because somehow tackling something head on was never. I know, the tax person. So my accountant, a cousin, said, "Oh, you can buy equipment and offset it against the tax you pay in your job at Chelsea Art School, where I was media resources officer." And so I did that for a couple of years, And then this tax inspector came along and had me in for questioning. And he was a horrible little man, and he was playing the one person nice and nasty. So one minute he'd be all nice and friendly, and then he said, "Oh, I expect you like nice wine and stuff, don't you?" And I said, "I wonder where's this going?" And anyway, what it all boiled down to at the end, and he said as much, was I must be making pornographic videos, because this was the only market he knew about.
That video could be used for?
Yes.
Wow. And
at that point I thought, well, one moment I was going to give up getting this bit of tax back, and the next minute I thought, no, why the fuck should I? And I said, and I persevered and said, you know, and also we were hiding the fact we were living there, because, you know, our expenses were practically nothing, because we were living above the shop sort of thing illegally, and I couldn't admit that. And in the end he said, well, I'm going to accept this tax, but you're the only person in Brixton that I've accepted it for. So there's all these other poor people without a kind of expert cousin behind them.
Wow. Well, there you go. You've got to be able to afford to do it now, haven't you? I mean, on many levels, it's much cheaper because I could use this phone to shoot stuff, and it's pretty lovely quality. But you know, the access to space and time to be with other people and to reflect and to be in a group together that thinks and is that's I think that's that much harder. I don't think it's quite the same having an online community as people being in a physical space together. It's partly why I loathe Zoom.
Yes, no, I agree. It's not the same at all. You don't build relationships on Zoom.
No.
It's just that possible one-to-one, if I look back to students, if you just see what students one-to-one.
I can stop this now because I got you.